so chapter 2 we have mapping the shadow patterns. So this slide that we're looking at here has two parts to it, obviously, and this is the way we're going to look at the majority of these slides. We have the rendered version, the original version on the left, and then on the right I applied a simple cutout filter in Photoshop to really break down the image into two parts. Now, especially what I'm about to say may seem very basic, and it is very basic, but the problem is a lot of folks overcomplicate it. Alright, so the very best images and pretty much everything we look at can be separated into the light and the dark. And when we look at it, it should appear very, very graphic where the two separate from each other. So we see this image, and I think we can agree that's a very solid drawing, very nicely done. And if we squint our eyes, we can see there's a very simple plane, the side of the nose and the side of the face here, simplified into a dark shape. Now, the problem many people make is that in this transition from the light shape into the dark shape, it's not done very confidently, or it's not done very enthusiastically, so it gets a little mushy, and in the darks there's a few light shapes, and in the light shapes there's a bunch of dark shapes, and it doesn't hold together as two clean separate shapes. That's a problem. So again, version on the right, when it's really pushed, you can see there's this shape here through the nose and on the side of the face. There's no question what's the light and what's the dark. And probably one of the _1 critiques I give to my earliest students, or my younger students rather, is there's too much variation in their lights and darks. They should read very cleanly. So if we look at this image here, this is a Spanish figure drawing from the turn of the last century. When we squint and really do it, like really lean back a bit and really squint your eyes, can you tell where the dark shape is and where the light shape is? Hopefully when you squint, it turns into what's happening here. And again, when we're looking at the face, we have this really nice separation, side plane of the nose, the forehead, and the side plane of the face, and all the side planes of the body. So what happens is that the lightest darks never equal the darkest lights. So let me say that again. The lightest darks, so the lightest area in your shadow shapes or in your darks, never equal the darkest areas in your lights. Just think about that. Let that sink in. I'm going to say it one more time. The lightest area of your darks do not equal the darkest area of your lights. So that means they're always going to separate from each other. And when they do, you get a nice clean image like this where you can tell where the plane changes happen. So this applies for very rendered images, and we can notice that as we move on, this applies for very simple graphic images like some comic book pictures. So here's another example. This is by Jacob Collins, who is a highly regarded figurative artist and painter and draftsman. And his work is highly rendered and very, very, very polished. He spends a long time on his images. He's at the forefront of atelier processes. And even though he's so rendered and puts a lot of time into making this very naturalistic, I think it's pretty obvious the lights and the darks still separate from each other very cleanly. Again, lean back. So everyone lean back. Really squint your eyes and look at that shape. Hopefully what you're seeing on the left image is basically what you're seeing on the right image, that clean separation. Now, as we move forward through this next 50 minutes together, I want everyone to know the goal is to be able to see all your subjects like this. Of course, your eyes and a camera are going to record a lot more information, but you want to see it like this, and you want your final drawing to be separate like this. Here's another example. This is by Steve Houston, who's one of my favorite figurative artists. And once again, there's really no problem at all separating the two. In this one, the thing with Steve Houston is he really likes to push the core shadow, which is the shadow in between, the transitional point in between light and dark. But we don't really need to talk about that too much. The main thing is that it's separate into what we're seeing here, right? So again, I'm basically going to be repeating myself as I move through here. I just want to emphasize the separation between light and dark. So this one is dominated by dark. I think we can tell, obviously, as the light is coming from this direction. And we just have a bit of a rim light. And then all this other area over here is a dark. Now if we really squint, we have a challenging area where the back is lit by a lot of reflected light. And we might be tempted to say that there's some light back here, as in this is part of the light shape, but it's not. The way we have to look at this shape is that that rim light here on the edge of his body and on the edge of his face, that's the light. Everything else is a dark. Now this extra information of the reflected light, that just happens to be what was happening in that scene and on that figure, but that's still a shadow. So we have to really clarify that. In a lot of instances, you're going to have a figure, and particularly if their skin is of lighter tone, their skin tone is going to reflect light onto other parts of their figure. And when that happens, there's going to be areas of dark that you might consider a light shape. But don't do that. Really think for yourself, what's the light and what's the dark? And this is the answer to that question here. And this is just a fun little piece of information. This was a drawing that Gustav Klimt did, I believe, when he was about 16 to 17 years old. So he didn't waste too much time, did he? Alright, anyways, so again, highly rendered, very good quality drawing. Squint your eyes, look at it. What is the clear delineation of light and shadow? Now, one area that the computer didn't really clarify is this bit of light here on his chest. Now we have to think about what we're looking at, and if we think the light is coming from the top left, it's catching the shoulder, it's crossing over into his chest a little bit, I think we can actually clarify that as some light shape. And right here in the Photoshop, it translated that as a dark shape, but I would disagree. But again, nice clean statement here. Alright, so all the images we looked at in these circumstances were mostly, for the most part, figures in a void, in an empty space. So how can you apply this thinking then to full compositions? And this is where it gets a little complicated, but I'll try to explain. So now, as we see in this picture, right, the light and the dark is happening inside the figure. So the figure itself has light, the figure itself has dark, right? And then we don't have to worry about it reading and being clear because there's really nothing in the background. But in the real world, now look at wherever you're at now. You could be at a studio, in front of your computer, looking at this on your phone, anywhere. Just put your hand in front of your head and look at how it interacts with the environment. Maybe there's a bookshelf behind your hand, maybe there's a wall, there could be all sorts of things behind your hand, and it's probably either a light or a dark shape, which makes it hard to see your hand. Do you get what I'm saying? So that if the wall right behind your hand is pure white, then that's a good thing, your hand pops out. But if there's all sorts of other things behind your hand, it makes it a little harder to see, as if it was a composition. The reason I say that is a lot of times when you're dealing with composition, there's going to be light and dark shapes and all sorts of action happening around your figures, and that might make it hard to find your figures. It might make it confusing. So then you have to look for the big shapes and call those light and dark. So we have this image here, and we have this female character. She does have light and dark, because you can obviously see where the light shapes are on her, in her hair, and then on her dress you can see where the dark shapes are, right? But overall, her figure as a whole is a light shape, and this background as a whole is a dark shape. So you can think of the individual subjects as they're having individual light and dark, but when you start to get into picture making, then you look at them as a whole as, are they a light shape or are they a dark shape? So for example, this is one where this whole figure here that has light and dark is considered a light shape. This background area, which has light and dark also, can be considered a dark shape. So let's see what would happen if we didn't do this, if we actually let everything bleed together. And here we have this image. So this is what happens, and hopefully this proves what I'm trying to talk about. This is what happens when the whole figure has full range of lights and darks, and the background also has full range lights and darks. The figure starts to get lost a little bit. You have to work and search to find it. And of course, I'm sure the artist was fully aware of that, and he created this type of image, which is very moody. You lose a lot of details. But a lot of circumstances, though, we may more want this direction where things are a little more clear. And we have one more image here where these figures here they have basically a full range of light and dark, and then they're in front of a dark shape. So in order to avoid what was happening here in this image, where the complicated figure gets lost in the complicated background, the artist decided to get rid of all the detail in the background so that the figures would still pop out. So what this shows is, if you have a complicated figure with a full range of light and darks in an environment with full range of light and darks, the image can get very confusing. So it's up to you as an artist to design the picture. That's what all this is about. You're interpreting what you're looking at. Okay, so just to summarize, I know that was a lot of information. That last part can also be pretty tricky if you haven't really thought about that before. Is that every image and every subject can be divided into light and dark shape. So when you look at it, you want to try to visualize it as the image on the right. Okay, very simple. Light and dark shape, everything. Okay, so then when you're putting together pictures, the way we see the world is sort of along the lines of this. And it can get kind of confusing. So that's why we're artists, we can do whatever we want. So then we start to view a figure as an overall light shape or an overall dark shape, and we start to do the same thing with the figures in a composition. So we're going to talk about this a little later. I'm going to do a demonstration and draw a figure in a composition. So try to keep all this in mind. Okay, on to the next chapter.